and I'm at that hour. So, hello everyone. I hope you are doing very well tonight. Now then, what are we doing? So, as always, my name is Skitterskreetch, and I am a little rat trapped inside a very big library, of which this big screen of a library is actually only a very small fragment. And as always, today I'll be reading for you. Tonight we got The Rich Boy by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which will be hopefully enjoyable. But yeah. But as always, we've got a little bit of business to take care of first, and then some time to fill to let people arrive. So, first things first. Well, I guess only things only, because we don't have any of the other things to do today. Let's head over to visit our good friend Lamp, who is certainly our friend and is not keeping us prisoner, and give our congratulations to Wild for your 5th first. Which, now that I say it out loud, is a little bit of a confusing way to word these, but being first for your 5th time, oh, there we are. And I do thank you so very much for doing so. Oh, okay, so the music went out for a little bit there, but we didn't go into the void, so that's probably a good sign. But yeah, so that's that done. I really feel like I gotta like have something where you get something after a certain point on some of these, because otherwise it feels like there's not like a lot of build up. But at the same time, I don't know what I should do. I don't know. I do a lot of badges. Maybe if you get a certain number of these, I'll do you a special custom badge that'll be your special badge for the channel. I don't know. I'll give it some thought. We'll do something with that someday. Anyway, but yeah, so that's done. Yeah, there's no new followers, books, or badges today. I've got to do any other badges. It's been a while. So yeah, so that being the case, we're going to go straight into our little pre-read and poetry read to give people time to arrive for the main story. So, yeah. Actually, I haven't actually introduced this for a while, so for anyone who's sort of new here, before the start of every one of these I like to give people time to arrive, about 10 minutes, so I do a little bit of poetry reading just ahead of these. So, we're going to go that right now. So let me just adjust them up real quick, and we'll begin. There we are. Now today, we'll be continuing on with our collection of the poetry of James Joyce. While we've finished with his chamber music, we still have a number of his named poems. Currently, I believe we're working our way through the collection of poems Pignac, and we'll pick up where we left off from last time. So, having finished She Reaps Over Rahon, the next of our poems is Toto Isiotto by James Joyce. A birdless heaven, sea dusk, one lone star, piercing the west, as thou, fond heart, love's time so faint, so far, rememberest. The clear young eyes' soft look, the candid brow, the fragrant hair, falling as though the silence falleth now, dusk of the air. Why then, remembering those shy, sweet lures, repine, when the dear love she yielded with a sigh was all but thine? Layla, good to have you. You join us now just as we're doing our little pre-main story poetry reading. Thank you for stopping by. I'm always so glad to see you. But yes, welcome in. The next I have for you is... My day is going rather well, thank you for asking. I hope your day is going equally well, as I hope for all of you, chat. Yes, the next one we have is On the Beach at Fontana, again by James Joyce. Wind whines and whines the shingle, the crazy pier stakes groan, the senile sea numbers each single silver slime silvered stone. From whining wind and colder, grey sea I wrap his warm, and touch his trembling fine-boned shoulder and his boyish arm. Around us fear descending, darkness of fear above, and in my heart how deep unending ache of love. Next we have is, you could read it as simples, but I suspect it is simples, for it is followed by the subheading, O bella bionda, c'est comme l'onda, again by James Joyce. Of cool sweet dew and radiant smile, the moon a web of silence weaves, in the still garden where a child gathers the simple salad leaves. A moondew stars her hanging hair, and moonlight kisses her young brow, and gathering she sings an air, fair as the wave is, fair art thou. Be mine, I pray, a waxen ear, to shield me from her childish croon, and mine a shielded heart for her, who gathers simples of the moon. Next we have Flood, again by James Joyce. I need to stop saying that. Gold brown upon the sated flood, the rock-vine clusters lift and sway, vast wings above the lambent waters brood of sullen day. A waste of waters ruthlessly sways and uplifts its weedy mane, where brooding day stares down upon the sea in its dulled stain. Uplift and sway, O golden vine, your clustered fruits to love's full flood, lambent and vast and ruthless is thine incertitude. Next we have Night Peace. Gaunt in gloom the pale stars their torches, and shroud, wave, ghost fires from heaven's far verges faint to loom. Arches on soaring arches, nights in dark nave. Seraphim, the lost hosts awaken to service till, in moonless gloom each lapse is muted, dim, raised when she has and shaken her thimble, her thurible. And long and loud to night's nave upsoaring, a star knell tolls, as the bleak incense surges cloud on cloud, voidward from the adoring waste of souls. Our next is Alone. The moon's grey golden meshes make all night a veil. The shore lamps in the sleeping lake, laburnum tendrils tail. The sly reeds whisper to the night a name, her name, and all my soul is a delight, a swoon of shame. Our next, a memory of the players in a mirror at midnight. They mouth love's language, gnash the 13 teeth. Your lean jaws grin with lash, your itch and quailing nude greed of the flesh. Love's breath, he knew is stale, worded or sung, the sourest cat's breath, harsh of tongue. This grave that stares lies not, stark skin and bone, leave greasy lips their kissing. None will choose her what you see to mouth upon. Dire hunger holds his hour. Pluck forth your heart, salt blood, a fruit of tears, pluck and devour. Next, Ban of Stress. The eye that mocks me sign the way, whereto I pass at eve of day. Grey way whose violent signals are the trysting and the twining star. Our star of evil, star of pain, heightened youth comes not again, nor old heart's wisdom yet to know the signs that mock me as I go. Next, a prayer. Again, come, give, yield all your strength to me. From far a low word breathes on the breaking brain. its cruel calm submission's misery, gentling her o'er as a soul predestined. Cease, silent love, my doom. Blind me with your dark nearness, oh have mercy, beloved enemy of my will. I dare not withstand the cold touch that I dread. Draw from me still. My slow life, bend deeper on me, threatening head, proud by my downfall, remembering, pitying him who is, him who was. Again, together, folded by the night, they lay on earth. I hear from far her low word breathe on my breaking brain. Come, I yield, bend deeper upon me, I am here. Subdue her, do not leave me. Only joy, only anguish. Take me, save me, soothe me, oh spare me. And in truth, that should probably be the last of our poems for the day. But this book I have has but one more in it, though it is separate from the poems Penyak. This one stands alone, outside of any collection, and is titled simply Eche Puerta. Of the dark past a child is born, with joy and grief my heart is torn. Calm in his cradle, the living lies, may love and mercy unclose his eyes. Young life is breathed on the glass, the world that was not comes to pass. A child is sleeping, an old man gone, O Father forsaken, forgive your son. And with that, we have finished our small collection of the poetry of James Joyce, and we shall move right on to our main reading for the evening. But first, let me adjust the mic back to our normal settings. And there we are. Don't know why doing the poetry always makes me sound so different. Microphones are crazy. Anyhow, right, so as I said before, our main story of the night is going to be The Rich Boy by F. Scott Fitzgerald. As always, if at any point while I'm reading this you should happen to miss some, either due to technical error, due to my stumbling over it, or due to some of the many vagaries of life that should come and interrupt you, do feel free to let me know. I'm happy to go back over anything. If you have thoughts, comments or questions, let me know. Thank you kindly, Layla. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah. If you have thoughts, comments, questions, do feel free to let me know. I'm always very happy to answer them. This one is broken into chapters. If you have a long question that would take a longer time, I'll probably wait until a chapter break. Otherwise, I can do something quickly in between. I'm always happy to hear from you and hear any thoughts or comments you have. Having said that, I'll first have a quick swallow of water, make sure we're in good nick to the reading. You're off. And then having done that, without any further ado, if you are sitting comfortably, I shall begin. The Rich Boy, Chapter 1. Begin with an individual, and before you know it, you find that you have created a type. Begin with a type, and you find that you have created nothing. That is because we are all queer fish, queerer beyond our faces and voices than we want anyone to know, or than we know ourselves. When I hear a man proclaiming himself an average, honest, open fellow, I feel pretty sure that he has some definite and perhaps terrible abnormality, which he has agreed to conceal. And his protestation of being average and honest and open is his way of reminding himself of his misprision. Not familiar with that word. There are no types, no plurals. There is a rich boy, and this is his, and not his brother's story. All my life I have lived among his brothers, but this one has been my friend. Besides, if I wrote about his brothers, I should have to begin by attacking all of the lies the poor have told about the rich, and the rich have told about themselves. Such a wild structure they have erected that, when we pick up a book about the rich, some instinct prepares us for unreality. Even the intelligent and impassioned reporters of life have made the country of the rich as unreal as fairyland. Let me tell you about the very rich. They are different from you and me. They possess and enjoy early, and it does something to them, makes them soft where we are hard, and cynical where we are trustful, in a way that, unless you was born rich, it's very difficult to understand. They think, deep in their hearts, that they are better than we are, because we had to discover the compensations and refuges of life for ourselves. Even when they enter deep into our world, or sink below us, they still think that they are better than we are. They are different. The only way I can describe young Anson Hunter is to approach him as if he were a foreigner and cling stubbornly to my point of view. If I accept his for a moment, I am lost. I have nothing to show but a preposterous movie. Oh, and that's the end of chapter 1. I don't think I've got anything to say about it though, so we'll press on with chapter 2 immediately. Anson was the eldest of 6 children, who would someday divide a fortune of $15 million. And he reached the age of reason, is it 7? At the beginning of the century, when daring young women was already gliding along Fifth Avenue in electric mobiles. In these days, he and his brothers had an English governess, who spoke the language very clearly and crisply and well, so the 2 boys grew to speak as she did. Their words and sentences was all crisp and clear and not run together as ours are. They didn't talk exactly like English children, but acquired an accent that is peculiar to fashionable people in the city of New York. In the summer, the 6 children was moved from the house on 71st Street to a big estate in northern Connecticut. It was not a fashionable locality. Anson's father wanted to delay as long as possible his children's knowledge of that side of life. He was a man somewhat superior to his class, which composed New York society, and of his period, which were the snobbish and formalised vulgarity of the Gilded Age. And he wanted his sons to learn habits of concentration and have sound constitutions and grow up in a right living and successful men. He and his wife kept an eye on them, as well as they was able, until the 2 older boys went away to school. But in huge establishments, this is difficult. They were much simpler in the series of small and medium-sized houses in which my own youth was spent. I was never far out the reach of my mother's voice, or the sense of her presence, her approval or disapproval. Anson's first sense of his superiority come to him when he realised the half-grudging American deference that were paid to him in the Connecticut village. The parents of the boys he played with always inquired after his father and mother, and were vaguely excited when their own children were asked to the Hunter's house. He accepted this as the natural state of things, and a sort of impatience with all groups of which he were not the centre, in money, in position, and authority, remained with him for the rest of his life. He disdained the struggle with the other boys for precedence. He expected it to be given him freely, and when it wasn't, he withdrew into his family. His family was sufficient, for, in the East, money is still a somewhat feudal thing, a clan forming thing. In the snobbish West, money separates families to form sets. At 18, when he went to New Haven, Anson was tall and thick-set, with a clear complexion and an healthy colour from the ordered life he had led in school. His hair was yellow and grew in a funny way on his head. His nose was beaked. These 2 things kept him from being handsome. But he had a confident charm and a certain brusque style. Abbe, welcome in. Yeah, glad to have you. You haven't missed much. We're just starting on the rich boy. We basically just had an introduction saying that the rich people are different, and we've had a little bit of his early life where he's acquired some of the habits of the general rich, where he thinks himself quite important. You haven't missed very much at all. But welcome in. Very glad to have you, as I always am. He had a confident charm and a certain brusque style. The upper-class men who passed him on the street knew, without being told, that he were a rich boy and had gone to one of the best schools. Nevertheless, his very superiority kept him from being a success in college. Independence was mistaken for egotism, and the refusal to accept Yale's standards with a proper rule seemed to belittle all those who had. I'm doing very well indeed, Abby. I hope you're doing equally as well. So, long before he graduated, he began to shift the centre of his life to New York. He was at home in New York. There was his own house with the kind of servants you can't get anymore, and his own family, of which, because of his good humour and a certain ability to make things go, he was rapidly becoming the centre of. And the debutante parties and the correct manly world of the men's club and the occasional wild spree with the gallant girls who New Haven only knew from Fifth Row. His aspirations were conventional enough. They included even the irreproachable Shadow he would someday marry, but they differed from the aspirations of the majority of young men, in that there were no mist over them, none of that quality which is variously known as idealism or illusion. Anson accepted without reservation the world of our finance and our extravagance, divorce and dissipation, a snobbery and privilege. Most of our lives end as a compromise. It was as a compromise that his life began. He and I first met in the late summer of 1917, when he was just out of Yale and, like the rest of us, were swept up into the systematized hysteria of the war. In the blue-green uniform of the Naval Aviation, he'd come down to Pensacola, where the hotel orchestras played I'm Sorry Dear, and we young officers danced with the girls. Everybody liked him, and though he ran with the drinkers and wasn't an especially good pilot, even the instructors treated him with a certain respect. He was always having long talks with them in his confident, logical voice. Talks was ended by his getting himself, or more frequently another officer, out of some impending trouble. He was convivial, bawdy, robustly avid for pleasure, and we were all surprised when he fell in love with a conservative and rather proper girl. Her name was Paula Legendre, a dark, serious beauty from somewhere in California. Her family kept a winter residence just outside of town and, in spite of her primness, she was enormously popular. There is a large class of men whose egotism can't endure humour in a woman. Anson wasn't that sort, and I couldn't understand the attraction of her sincerity. That was the thing to say about her, for his keen and somewhat sardonic mind. Nevertheless, they fell in love, and on her terms. He no longer joined the twilight gatherings at the DeSoto bar. Whenever they were seen together, they were engaged in long, serious dialogue, which must have gone on several weeks. Long afterwards, he told me they were not about anything in particular. They were composed on both sides of immature and even meaningless statements. The emotional content that gradually came to fill it grew up not out of the words, but out of its enormous seriousness. It was sort of hypnosis. Often it were interrupted, giving way to that emasculated humour we would call fun. When they was alone, it were resumed again, solemn, low-keyed, and pitched so as to give each other a sense of unity in feeling and form. They come to resent any interruption of it, to be unresponsive to facetiousness about life, even to the mild cynicism of their contemporaries. It was only happy when the dialogue were going on, and its seriousness bathed them like the amber glow of an open fire. Towards the end there came an interruption they did not resent. It began to be uninterrupted by passion. Ah, Fitz, good to have you. I'll finish out the chapter and then I'll catch everyone at the other side. Oddly enough, Anson was just as engrossed in the dialogue as she, as profoundly affected by it. Yet at the same time aware that on his side much were insincere, on hers much were merely simple. At first too he despised her emotional simplicity as well. With his love her nature deepened and blossomed, and he could despise it no longer. He felt that if he could enter into Paula's warm, safe life he would be happy. The long preparation of the dialogue removed any constraint. He taught her some of what he had learned from more adventurous women, and she responded with a rapt, holy intensity. One evening after a dance they agreed to marry. He wrote a long letter about her to his mother. The next day Paula told him that she was rich, and that she had a personal fortune of nearly $1 million. Yeah. Just to catch you up, Fitz, assuming that you've just arrived, we started The Rich Boy. That was the end of chapter 2 there. The first was just a sort of musing on the nature of the rich and how they are very distinctly different from normal people and think themselves above us. The second was the introduction to our character, Anson Hunter, who, eldest son of a man worth $15 million, grew up, sort of immediately discovered himself to be rich and sort of developed habits based around that. Sort of a snob, lives in breathes New York and has now fallen in love with a surprisingly conservative woman out of California called Paula, who, after a strange courtship where they just talked to each other about nothing at all and had a sort of meaningless dialogue that became filled with emotions, he has finally agreed to marry her and found out that she herself is independently wealthy. Yeah, thank you for coming in and welcome. Oh, I'll have a swallow of water. Not too much to say about that chapter either. I mean, there's some definitely oddness about the relationship, and you're starting to see the sort of parts that were mentioned about no two people being the same, there not being anything such thing as an archetype. There's more to go on. I would just say again though, I do love how much Fitzgerald very clearly does not esteem rich people. It's refreshing somewhat. Anyhow, but pressing on. Chapter 3. It were exactly as if they could say, neither of us has anything we should be poor together. Just as delightful they should be rich, instead. It gave them the same communion of adventure. Yet when Anson got leave in April, and Paula and her mother accompanied him north, she was impressed with the standing of his family in New York, and with the scale on which they lived. Alone with Anson for the first time in the rooms where he had played as a boy, she was filled with a comfortable emotion, as if she were preeminently safe and taken care of. The pictures of Anson in a skull cap at his first school, of Anson on horseback with the sweetheart of a mysterious forgotten summer, of Anson in a gay group of ushers and bridesmaids at a wedding, made her jealous of his life apart from her in the past. And so completely did this authoritative person seem to sum up and typify these possessions of his, that she was inspired with the idea of being married immediately and returning to Pensacola as his wife. But an immediate marriage wasn't discussed. Even the engagement was to be secret until after the war. When she realised that only 2 days of his leave remained, her dissatisfaction crystallised in the intention of making him as unwilling to wait as she were. They was driving to the country for dinner, and she determined to force the issue that night. Now, a cousin of Paula's was staying with them at the Ritz, a severe, bitter girl who loved Paula but was somewhat jealous of her impressive engagement. And as Paula were late in dressing, the cousin, who weren't going to the party, received Anson in the parlour of the suite. Anson had met friends at 5 o'clock and drunk freely and indiscreetly with them for an hour. He left the Yale Club at a proper time. His mother's chauffeur drove him to the Ritz, but his usual capacity was not in evidence, and the impact of the steam-heated sitting room made him suddenly dizzy. He knew it, and he was both amused and sorry. Paula's cousin was 25, but she was exceptionally naive, and first failed to realise what were up. She had never met Anson before, and she was surprised when he mumbled strange information and nearly fell off his chair. But until Paula appeared, it didn't once occur to her that what she had taken for the odour of a dry-cleaned uniform was really whiskey. But Paula understood as soon as she appeared. Her only thought was to get Anson away before her mother saw him, and at the look in her eye the cousin understood too. When Paula and Anson descended to the limousine, they found 2 men inside, both asleep. There was the men with whom he had been drinking at the Yale Club, and they was also going to the party. He had entirely forgotten their presence in the car. On the way to Hempstead, they awoke and sang. Some of the songs was rough, and though Paula tried to reconcile herself to the fact that Anson had a few verbal inhibitions, her lip tightened with shame and distaste. Back at the hotel, the cousin, confused and agitated, considered the incident, and then walked into Mrs. Legendre's bedroom, saying, "Isn't he funny?" "Who is funny?" "Why, Mr. Hunter. He seems so funny." Mrs. Legendre looked at her sharply. "How is he funny?" "Why, he said he was French. I didn't know he was French." "That's absurd. You must have misunderstood." She smiled. "It was a joke." The cousin shook her head stubbornly. "No, he said he was brought up in France. He said he couldn't speak any English, and that's why he couldn't talk to me. And he couldn't." Mrs. Legendre looked away with impatience, just as the cousin added thoughtfully, "Perhaps it was because he was so drunk," and walked out of the room. The curious report was true. Anson, finding his voice thick and uncontrollable, had taken the unusual reference of announcing that he spoke no English. Years afterwards, he used to tell that part of the story, and he invariably communicated the uproarious laughter which the memory aroused in him. 5 times in the next hour, Mrs. Legendre tried to get Hempstead on the phone. When she succeeded, there were a 10-minute delay before she heard Paula's voice on the wire. Cousin Joe told me Anson was intoxicated. Oh no. Oh yes. Cousin Joe said he was intoxicated. He told her he was French and fell off his chair and behaved as if he were very, very intoxicated. I don't want you to come home with him. Mother, he's all right. Please don't worry about it. But I do worry. I think it's dreadful. I want you to promise me not to come home with him. I'll take care of it, Mother. I don't want you to come home with him. All right, Mother. Goodbye. Be sure now, Paula. Ask someone to bring you. Deliberately, Paula took the receiver from her ear and hung up. Her face was flushed with helpless annoyance. Anson was stretched out, asleep in a bedroom upstairs, while the dinner party below were proceeding lamely towards conclusion. The hour's drive had sobered him somewhat. His arrival was merely hilarious, and Paula hoped the evening were not spoiled, after all. But 2 imprudent cocktails before dinner completed the disaster. He talked boisterously and somewhat offensively to the party at large for 15 minutes, and then slid silently under the table like a man in an old print. But unlike in an old print, it was rather horrible without being at all quaint. None of the young girls present remarked upon the incident. It seemed to merit only silence. His uncle and 2 other men carried him upstairs, and it was just after this that Paula was called on the phone. An hour later, Anson awoke in a fog of nervous agony, through which he perceived, after a moment, the figure of his Uncle Robert standing by the door. I said, "Are you better?" "What?" "Do you feel better, old man?" "Terrible," said Anson. "I'm going to try you on another brandy bromo seltzer. If you can hold it down, it'll do you good to sleep." With an effort, Anson slid his legs from the bed and stood up. "I'm all right," he said dully. "Take it easy. I think if you gave me a glass of brandy, I could go downstairs." "Oh, no." "Yes, that's the only thing. I'm all right now. I suppose I'm in Dutch down here." "I know you're a little under the weather," said his uncle depreciatingly, "but don't worry about it. Sheila didn't even get here. He passed away in the locker room over at the Links." Indifferent to any opinion except Paula's, Anson was nevertheless determined to save the debris of the evening. But when, after a cold bath, he made his appearance, most of the party had already left. Paula got up immediately to go home. In the limousine, the old serious dialogue began. She had known that he drank, she admitted, but she'd never expected anything like this. It seemed to her that perhaps they were not suited to each other after all. Their ideas about life was too different. And so forth. When she finished speaking, Anson spoke in turn, very soberly, and Paula said she'd have to think it over. She wouldn't decide the night. She was not angry, but she was terribly sorry. Nor would she let him come into her hotel with her, but just before she got out of the car, she leaned and kissed him unhappily on the cheek. The next afternoon, Anson had a long talk with Mrs. Legendare, while Paula sat listening in silence. It was agreed that Paula would have brooded over the incident for a proper period, and then, if mother and daughter thought it best, they would follow Anson to Pensacola. On his part, he apologised with sincerity and dignity. That was all. With every card in their hand, Mrs. Legendare were unable to establish any advantage over him. He made no promises, showed no humility, only delivered a few serious comments on life, which brought him off with rather a moral superiority at the end. When they come south 3 weeks later, neither Anson, in his satisfaction, nor Paula in her relief at the reunion, realised that the psychological moment had passed forever. That's the end of chapter 3, with some rather ominous words there. So, I'll have a quick swallow of water. And we establish a bad habit. And of course we established it and get away with it too. Bad things to establish, yeah. That's interesting, really. I'm starting to get a sense of why this is called the rich boy rather than the rich man. But let's press on, shall we? Chapter 4. He dominated and attracted her, and at the same time filled her with anxiety. Confused by his mixture of solidity and self-indulgence, a sentiment and cynicism, incongruities which her gentle mom were unable to resolve, Paula grew to think of him as two alternating personalities. When she saw him alone, or at a formal party, or with his casual inferiors, she felt a tremendous pride in his strong, attractive presence, the paternal understanding stature of his mind. In other company, she had become uneasy when what had been a fine imperviousness to mere gentility showed its other face. The other face was gross, humorous, reckless of everything but pleasure. It startled her mind temporarily away from him, even led her into a short, covert experiment with an old beau, but with no use. After 4 months of Anson's enveloping vitality, there were an anemic pallor in all other men. In July he ordered abroad, and their tenderness and desire reached a crescendo. Paula considered a last-minute marriage, decidedly against it only because there were always cocktails on his breath now. But the parting itself made her physically ill with grief. After his departure, she wrote him long letters of regret for the days of love that they had missed by waiting. In August, Anson's plane slipped down into the North Sea. He was pulled onto a destroyer after a night in the water and sent to hospital with pneumonia. The armistice was signed before he was fully sent home. Finally sent home, sorry. Then, with every opportunity given back to them, with no material obstacle to overcome, the secret weavings of their temperaments come between them, drying up their kisses and their tears, making their voices less loud to one another, muffling the intimate chatter of their eyes, till the old communication were only possible by letters from far away. One afternoon, a society reporter waited for 2 hours in the Hunter's house for a confirmation of their engagement. Anson denied it. Nevertheless, an early issue carried the report as a leading paragraph. They was constantly seen together at Southampton Hot Springs and Tuxedo Park. But the serious dialogue had turned a corner into a long-sustained quarrel, and the affair almost played out. Anson got drunk frequently and missed an engagement with her, whereupon Paula made certain behaviouristic demands. His despair were helpless before his pride, and his knowledge of himself. The engagement was definitely broken. "Dearest," said their letters now, "dearest, dearest, when I wake up in the middle of the night and realise that after all it was not to be, I feel that I want to die. I can't go on living anymore. Perhaps when we meet this summer we may talk things over and decide differently. We were so excited and sad that day, and I don't feel that I can live all my life without you. You speak of other people. Don't you know there are no other people for me, but only you?" As Paula drifted here and there around the east, she would sometimes mention her gaieties to make him wonder. Anson was too acute to wonder. When he saw a man's name in letters, he felt more sure of her, and a little disdainful. He was always superior in such things, but he still hoped that they would someday marry. Meanwhile, he plunged vigorously in all the movement and glitter of post-bellum New York, entering a brokerage house, joining half a dozen clubs, dancing late and moving in 3 worlds: his own world, a world of young Yale graduates, and the section of the half world which rests on one end of Broadway. There were always a thorough and infractable 8 hours devoted to his work in Wall Street, where the combination of his influential family connection, his sharp intelligence, and his abundance of sheer physical energy brought him almost immediately forward. He had one of those invaluable minds with partitions in it. Sometimes he appeared at his office refreshed by less than an hour's sleep, but such occurrences was rare. So early as 1920, his income in salary and commission exceeded $12,000. As the Yale tradition slipped into the past, he became more and more of a popular figure among his classmates in New York, more popular than he had ever been in college. He lived in a great house, and had the means of introducing young men into other great houses. Moreover, his life had already seemed secure, while theirs, for the most part, had arrived again at precarious beginnings. They commenced to turn to him for amusement and escape, and Anson responded readily, taking pleasure in helping people and arranging their affairs. There was no men in Paula's letters now, but a note of tenderness ran through them that had not been there before. From several sources he heard that she had an heavy beau, low affair, a Bostonian of wealth and position. And though he was sure she still loved him, it made him uneasy to think that he might lose her, after all. So for one unsatisfactory day, she had not been in New York for almost 5 months. As the rumours multiplied, he became increasingly anxious to see her. In February, he took his vacation and went down to Florida. Palm Beach sprawled plump and opulent between the sparkling sapphire of Lake Worth, floored here and there by houseboats at anchor, and the great turquoise bar of the Atlantic Ocean. The huge bulks of the breakers and the Royal Poinciana rose as the twin paunches from the bright level of the Sound, and around them clustered the dancing glade, Bradley's House of Chance, and a dozen modistes and milliners with good as triple prices from New York. Upon the trellis veranda of the breakers, 200 women stepped right, step left, wheeled and slid in that celebrated calisthenic known as the double shuffle, while at half time, with the music 2,000 bracelets clicked up and down on 200 arms. At the Everglades Club after dark, Paula and Loa Thayer and Anson and a casual fool played bridge with hot cards. It seemed to Anson that her kind, serious face were wan and tired. She had been around now for 5 years. He had known her for 3. 2 spades. Cigarette? Oh, I pardon you by me. Pie? I'll double 3 spades. There was a dozen tables of bridge in the room, which were filling up with smoke. Anson's eyes met Paula's, held them persistently, even with Thayer's glance fell between them. Hey Naska, good to have you. You're coming in about a third of the way into the story today, but our titular rich boy, Anson Hunter, has been introduced. We've had him growing up a little bit. He's made the sort of usual splash into New York life, and during the war, I had an engagement with a girl who he sort of run into some trouble with due to his drinking. And he's currently trying to get her back after establishing himself as one of the young power players in New York City. And they're down in Florida right now playing bridge. So, yeah, thank you for stopping by. I always appreciate it. There was a dozen tables of bridge in the room, which were filling up with smoke. Anson's eyes met Paula's, held them persistently, even when Thayer's glance fell heavy between them. What was bid? He asked abstractedly. Rows of Washington Square, sang the young people in the corners, and withering there in basement air. The smoke banked like fog, and the opening of a door filled the room with blown swirls of ectoplasm. Little bright eyes streaked past the table, seeking Mr. Conan Doyle among the Englishmen, who were poisoned as Englishmen about the lobby. You could cut it with a knife, a knife. At the point end of the rubber, Paula suddenly got up and spoke to Anson in a tense, low voice. With scarcely a glance at Loa Thayer, they walked out the door and descended a long flight of stone steps. In a moment they was walking hand in hand along the moonlit beach. Darling, darling. They embraced recklessly, passionately in the shadow. Then Paula drew back her face to let his lips say what she wanted to hear. She could feel the words forming as they kissed again. Again she broke away, listening. But as he pulled her close once more, she realised that he had said nothing, only, darling, darling, in that deep, sad whisper that always made her cry. Humbly, obediently, her emotion yielded to him, and the tears streamed down her face. Her heart kept on crying, ask me, oh Anson, ask me. Paula, Paula. The words wrung her heart like hands. And Anson, feeling her tremble, knew that the emotion were enough. He need say no more, commit their destinies to no practical enigma. Why should he, when he might hold her so, biding his own time for another year, forever? You were considering them both, her more than yourself. For a moment, when she said suddenly that she must go back to her hotel, he hesitated, thinking first, this is the moment after all, and then, no, let it wait. She is mine. He had forgotten that Paula too were worn away inside, with the strain of 3 years. Her mood passed forever in the night. He went back to New York next morning, filled with a certain restless dissatisfaction. Late in April, without warning, he received a telegram from Bar Harbor, which Paula told him that she were engaged to Lothair, that they would be married immediately in Boston. What he never really believed could happen had happened at last. Anson filled himself with whiskey that morning, and, going to the office, carried on his work without a break, rather with a fear of what would happen if he stopped. In the evening he went out as usual, saying nothing of what had occurred. He was cordial, humorous, unabstracted. But one thing he could not help. For 3 days, in any place, in any company, he would suddenly bend his head into his hands and cry like a child. That's the end of chapter 4. I have a drink. Avoiding his emotions. Indeed, indeed, he is a boy. Wonder if he'll grow to a man by the end of things, eh? Well, we'll find out. Chapter 5. In 1922, when Anson went abroad with the junior partner to investigate some London loans, the journey intimated that he were to be taken into the firm. He was 27 now, a little heavy without being definitely stout, and with a manner older than his years. Old people and young people liked him and trusted him, and mothers felt safe when their daughters was in his charge, for he had a way, when he come into a room, of putting himself on a footing with the oldest and most conservative people there. You and I, he seemed to say, we're solid. We understand. He had an instinctive and rather charitable knowledge of the weaknesses of men and women, and, like a priest, it made him the more concerned for the maintenance of outward forms. It was typical of him every Sunday morning. He taught in a fashionable... It was typical of him that every Sunday morning he taught in a fashionable Episcopal Sunday school, even though a cold shower and a quick change in a cutaway coat were all that separated him from the wild night before. After his father's death, he was the practical head of the family, and, in effect, guided by the destinies of the younger children. Through a complication, his authority did not extend to his father's estate, which were administered by his Uncle Robert, who was the horsey member of the family, a good-natured, hard-drinking member of that set which centres around Wheatley Hills. Uncle Robert and his wife, Edna, had been great friends of Anson's youth, and the former were disappointed when his nephew's superiority failed to take an horsey form. He backed him for a city club, which were the most difficult in America to enter. One could only join if one's family had helped to build up New York, or in other words, were rich before 1880. When Anson, after his election, neglected it for the Yale Club, Uncle Robert gave him a little talk on the subject. When on top of that, Anson declined to enter Robert Hunter's own conservative and somewhat neglected brokerage house, his manner grew cooler. Like a primary teacher who was taught all he knew, he slipped out of Anson's life. There were so many friends in Anson's life, scarcely one for whom he had not done some unusual kindness, and scarcely one whom he did not occasionally embarrass by his bursts of rough conversation, or his habit of getting drunk wherever and however he liked. It annoyed him when anyone else blundered in that regard. About his own lapses he was always humorous. Odd things happened to him, and he told them with infectious laughter. I was working in New York City that spring, and I used to lunch with him at the Yale Club, which my university was sharing until the completion of our own. I had read of Paula's marriage, and one afternoon, when I asked him about her, something moved him to tell me the story. After that, he frequently invited me to family dinners at his house, and behaved as though there were a special relationship between us, as though with his confidence a little of that consuming memory had passed into me. I found that, despite the trust in mothers, his attitude towards girls were not indiscriminately protective. It were up to the girl. If she showed an inclination towards looseness, she must take care of herself, even with him. Life, he would explain sometimes, has made a cynic of me. By life, he meant Paula. Sometimes, especially when he was drinking, he'd become a little twisted in his mind, and he thought that she had callously thrown him over. That cynicism, or rather his realisation that naturally fast girls was not worth sparing, led to his affair with Dolly Carger. It wasn't his only affair in those years, but it come nearest to touching him deeply, and it had a profound effect upon his attitude towards life. Dolly was the daughter of a notorious publicist who had married into society, She herself grew up in the Junior League, came out at the Plaza, and went to the Assembly. And only a few old families, like the Hunters, could question whether or not she belonged, for her picture were often in the papers, and she had more enviable attention than many girls who undoubtedly did. She was dark-haired, with carmine lips and an eye a lovely colour, which she concealed under pinkish grey powder all through the first year out, because our colour were unfashionable. Victorian pale were the thing to be. She wore black, severe suits, and stood with her hands in her pockets, leaning a little forward, with a humorous restraint on her face. She danced exquisitely, better than anything she liked to dance, better than anything except making love. Since she was 10, she had always been in love, and usually with some boy who didn't respond to her. Those who did, and there was many, bored her after a brief encounter, but for her failures she reserved a warmer spot in her heart. When she met them, she would always try once more. Sometimes she succeeded, more often she failed. It never occurred to this gypsy of the unattainable that there were a certain resemblance in those who refused to love her, that she had an odd intuition that saw through her to her weakness. Not weakness of emotion, but weakness of rudder. Anson perceived this when he first met her, less than a month after Paula's marriage. He would drink him rather heavily, and he pretended for a week that he was falling in love with her. Then he dropped her as abruptly and forgot. Immediately he took up on the commanding position in her heart. Like so many girls of that day, Dolly was slightly and indiscreetly wild. The unconventionality of the slightly older generation had been simply one facet of the post-war movement to discredit obsolete manners. Dolly were both older and shabby, and she saw in Anson the two extremes which the emotionally shiftless young woman seeks, an abandon to indulgence alternating with a protective strength. In his character she felt both the sybarite and the solid rock, and these two satisfied every need of her nature. She felt that it was going to be difficult, but she mistook the reason. She thought that Anson and his family expected a more spectacular marriage, but she guessed immediately that her advantage lay in his tendency to drink. They met at the large debutante dances, but as our infatuation increased, they managed to be more and more together. Like most mothers, Mrs. Carger believed that Anson were exceptionally reliable, so she allowed Dolly to go with him to distant country clubs and suburban houses without inquiring closely into their activities, or question her explanation when they come in late. At first, these explanations might have been accurate, but Dolly's worldly ideas of capturing Anson were soon engulfed in the rise and sweep of her emotion. Kisses in the back of taxis and motor cars was no longer enough. They did a curious thing. They dropped out of their world for a while, and made another world just beneath it, where Anson's tippling and Dolly's irregular hours would be less noticed and commented on. It would compose this world of varying elements. Several of Anson's Yale friends and their wives, 2 or 3 young brokers and bond salesmen, and a handful of unattached men fresh from college with money and a propensity to dissipation. What this world lacked in spaciousness and scale, it made up for by allowing them a liberty that scarcely permitted itself. Moreover, it centred around them and permitted Dolly the pleasure of faint condescension, a pleasure which Anson, whose whole life was condescension from the certitudes of his childhood, was unable to share. He would not love her, and in the long feverish winter of their affair he frequently told her so. In the spring he was weary. He wanted to renew his life at some other source. Moreover, he saw that either he must break with her now, or accept the responsibility of a definite seduction. The family's encouraging attitude precipitated his decision. One evening, when Mr. Carger knocked discreetly at the library door to announce that he had left a bottle of old brandy in the dining room, Anson felt that life was hemming him in. That night, he wrote her a short letter, in which he told her that he was going on his vacation, and that in view of all the circumstances, they had better meet no more. It was June. His family had closed up the house and gone at the country, so he were living temporarily at the Ale Club. I had heard about his affair with Dolly as it developed. Accounts salted with humour, for he despised unstable women, and granted them no place in the social edifice which he believed, and which he told me that night he was definitely breaking with her. I was glad. I had seen Dolly here and there, and each time with a feeling of pity at the hopelessness of her struggle, and a shame at knowing so much about her that I had no right to know. She was always known as a pretty little thing, but there was a certain recklessness which rather fascinated me. Her dedication to the goddess of waste would have been less obvious had she been less spirited. She would most certainly throw herself away. I was glad when I heard that sacrifice would not be consummated in my sight. Anson were going to leave the letter of farewell at our house next morning. But one of the few houses left open in the Fifth Avenue district. We knew that the Cargers acted upon erroneous information from Dolly and foregone a trip to give their daughter a chance. As he stepped out the door of the Yale Club in the Madison Avenue, a postman passed him, and he followed him back inside. The first letter that caught his eye was in Dolly's hand. He knew what it would be, a lonely and tragic monologue full of the reproaches he knew, the invoked memories and I wonder ifs, all the immemorial intimacies that he had communicated to Paula, legend rare in what seemed another age. Thumbing over some bills, he brought it on top again and opened it. He was surprised it was a short, somewhat formal note, which said that Dolly would be unable to go to the country with him for the weekend because Percy from Chicago had unexpectedly come to town. It added that Anson had brought this on himself. If I felt that you loved me as I loved you, I would go with you at any time, any place. But Perry is so nice, and he so much wants me to marry him. And we'll pause here, because the answer's about to come on. Interesting. He keeps getting thrown over, does our poor man? Our poor boy, I should say. And the answer's on, so I'll start with a drink. Yeah. So what is there to say about this then? So far? Well, first thing first, it's very typical Fitzgerald. The setting, the people, the sort of prominence, the whole hoi of the rich people of the 1920s is very, very, standard in. And the high-flying sort of mover and shaker that is our Anson Hunter is not very typical of a Fitzgerald character. Not quite the Great Gatsby, because Gatsby was a fraud, but certainly in the sort of mould. Indeed, he would seem very typical indeed, aside from the one fact of his being well, I guess not continually, but now twice, which seems like a pattern emerging, thrown over by young women who have rejected him. I suspect this was likely to be the sort of shape of his characters. He's how would you say? I don't know, I suspect that he's going to be a sticking point with him, on account of his, the point that was made of his condescension growing up. The fact that he sees himself in the centre of things. And now, just as he continues to be in the centre of things, or he expects himself to be in the centre of things, twice over he's been put off by women who, I guess, the first question I suppose is, how would you say? Well, the first girl he does intend to marry. He wants her to, maybe he doesn't want to marry her, but he wants her to like him. And the second girl, though, he intends to throw her over, he intends to leave her, he intends to break things off. But by being thrown over by her breaking things off on her own account, I suspect he's about to be hurt about it. Much the same way that by his rejecting her at first, she become more obsessed with him. That's actually another thing I wanted to mention, I remember now. It's strange, because at the start of the story there's a whole mention of there are no archetypes, there's no set of, or no type of people, there are just people. But the way in which this woman is described, this set of desperate young women, well not desperate, but loose young women is described as having these same desires and same needs. It does seem to undercut that. Maybe it's not intentional, maybe it is, but it does seem a little bit sexist. That might be the author's voice, or it might be the characters, I can't tell. Anyhow, swallow water. But yeah, I think we're a bit too focused on Anson, though, to really be overly considering the rest of things. That might be why. Anyway, we're back now, so pressing on. Perry is so nice, and he so much wants me to marry him." Anson smiled contemptuously. He had experience with such decoy epistles. Moreover, he knew how Dolly had laboured over this plan, probably sent for the faithful Perry and calculated the time of his arrival. He even laboured over the note so it would make him jealous without driving him away. Like most compromises, he had neither force nor vitality, only a timorous despair. Suddenly he were angry. He sat down in the lobby and read it again. Then he went to the phone, called Dolly, and told her in his clear, compelling voice he had received her note and would call for her at 5 o'clock as they had previously planned. Scarcely waiting for the pretended uncertainty of her "perhaps I can see you for an hour," he hung up the receiver and went down to his office. On the way he tore his own letter into bits and dropped it in the street. He was not jealous. She meant nothing to him. But her pathetic ruse, everything stubborn and self-indulgent in him, come to the surface. It was a presumption from a mental inferior, and it could not be overlooked. If she wanted to know to whom she belonged, she would see. He was on the doorstep at 5:15. Dolly was dressed for the street, and he listened in silence to the paragraph of "I can only see you for an hour," and she had begun on the phone. "Put on your hat, Dolly," he said. "We'll take a walk." They strolled up Madison Avenue and over to 5th, while Anson's shirt dampened upon his portly belly. "Fair enough, Happy." What was that? "Nostrovia, your elf." Right, stretch. Okay. Gonna stretch my neck before I stand up and do the rest of me, so if there's any cracks, you know. Nothing really going there, but how we stand. Oh. Thanks for them. Oof. I never really think of it, but it is good for me. I appreciate it. No big cracks that time, but I do feel the better for it. Thank you kindly, Blake, and to you, Abbe, as well. Right then. Where was we? Nice. They strolled up Madison Avenue and over to 5th, while Anson's shirt darkened upon his portly body in the deep heat. He talked little, scolding her, making no love to her, but before they had walked 6 blocks, she was his again, apologising for the note, offering not to see Perry at all as an atonement, offering anything. She thought that he had come because he was beginning to love her. "I'm hot," he said when they reached 71st Street. "This is a winter suit. If I stop by the house and change, would you mind waiting for me downstairs? I'll only be a minute." She was happy. The intimacy of his being hot, of any physical fact about him, thrilled her. When they come to the iron-grated door and Anson took out his key, she experienced a sort of delight. Downstairs it was dark, and after he ascended in the lift, Dolly raised a curtain and looked out through the opaque glace at the houses over the way. She heard the lift machinery stop, and with the notion of teasing him, pressed the button that brought it down. Then, a little more of an impulse, she got into it and sent up to what she guessed were his floor. "Anson," she called, laughing a little. "Just a minute," he answered from his bedroom, and after a brief delay, "Now you can come in." He had changed from a button in his vest. "This is my room," he said lightly. "How do you like it?" She caught sight of Paula's picture on the wall and stared at it in fascination, just as Paula had stared at the picture of Anson's childish sweethearts 5 years before. She knew something about Paula. Sometimes she tortured herself with fragments of the story. Suddenly she came close to Anson, raising her arms. They embraced. Outside the area window, a soft artificial twilight already hovered, though the sun was still bright on the back roof across the way. In half an hour the room would be quite dark. The uncalculated opportunity overwhelmed them, made them both breathless, and they clung more closely. It was imminent, inevitable. Still holding one another, they raised their heads, their eyes fell together upon Paula's picture, staring down at them from the wall. Suddenly Anson dropped his arms and, sitting down at his desk, tried the drawer with a bunch of keys. "Like a drink?" he asked in a gruff voice. "No, Anson." He poured himself half a tumbler of whiskey and swallowed it, and then opened the door into the hall. "Come on," he said. Dolly hesitated. "Anson, I'm going to the country with you tonight after all. You understand that, don't you?" "Of course," he answered brusquely. In Dolly's car they rode on to Long Island, closer in their emotions than they had ever been before. They knew what would happen, not with Paula's face to remind them that something was lacking, but when they was alone in the still, hot Long Island night, they did not care. The estate in Port Washington, where they was to spend the weekend, belonged to a cousin of Anson's, who had married a Montana copper operator. An interminable drive begun at the lodge and twisted under imported poplar saplings towards a huge pink Spanish house. Anson had often visited there before. After dinner they danced at the Lynx Club. Just a small thing to note here that I've listed up. I mentioned the Lynx Club before when we were in New York, and that was Lynx Links. This is Lynx Linx. Just a small note, but I think it's interesting. After dinner they danced at the Lynx Club. About midnight, Anson assured himself that his cousin would not leave before 2. Then he explained that Dolly was tired. He would take her home and return to the dance later. Trembling a little with excitement, they got into a borrowed car together and drove to Port Washington. As they reached the lodge, he stopped and spoke to the night watchman. "When are you making a round, Carl?" "Right away." "And you'll be here till everybody's in?" "Yes, sir." "All right. Listen. If any automobile, no matter whose it is, turns into this gate, I want you to phone the house immediately." He put a $5 bill into Carl's hand. "Is that clear?" "Yes, Mr. Anson." Being of the old world, he neither winked nor smiled. Yet Dolly sat with her face turned slightly away. Anson had a key. Once inside, he poured a drink for them both. Dolly left hers untouched. Then he ascertained definitely the location of the phone and found that it were in easy hearing distance of their room, both of which was on the first floor. 5 minutes later, he knocked at the door of Dolly's room. "Anson?" He went in, closing the door behind him. She were in bed, leaning up anxiously with elbows on the pillows, sitting beside her. He took her in his arms. "Anson? Darling?" He didn't answer. "Anson? Anson, I love you. Say you love me. Say it now. Can't you say it now, even if you don't mean it?" He did not listen. Over her head, he perceived that the picture of Paula were hanging her ear upon this wall. He got up and went close to it. The frame gleamed faintly with frost-reflected moonlight. Within were a blurred shadow of her face that he saw he did not know. Almost sobbing, he turned around and stared with abomination at the little figure on the bed. "This is all foolishness," he said thickly. "I don't know what I was thinking about. I don't love you, and you'd better wait for somebody that loves you. I don't love you a bit, can't you understand?" His voice broke, and he went hurriedly out. Back in the saloon, he was pouring himself a drink with uneasy fingers, and the front door opened suddenly, and his cousin came in. "Why, Anson, I hear Dolly's sick." "Oh, sorry. Why, Anson, I hear Dolly's sick," she began solicitously. "I hear she's sick." "It was nothing," he interrupted, raising his voice so that it would carry into Dolly's room. "She was a little tired. She went to bed." For a long time afterwards, Anson believed that a protective God sometimes interfered in human affairs. But Dolly Carter, lying awake and staring at the ceiling, never again believed in anything at all. That's the end of chapter 5. I'm not entirely clear on what to think of that. Let me have my swallow of water first. I'll do a little reflection. I think that were intended, at least, to be quite an harrowing scene. And in some ways I do think it was quite an harrowing scene. Well, I think some of the, the punch of it would have gone out a little bit with the change in social rules. the inherent horror of having premarital sex in the 1920s is a little bit undercut by more modern sensibilities. But I think emotionally it is quite a dark scene. It's almost the darkest hour. Because whether or not whether or not you consider the sort of abuse taking place, the what you call it, Sully virtue, whatever, be significant, he's clearly about to take advantage of a woman who he is, if not abusing, then definitely controlling over. And he's very clear he doesn't care for her. He's solely doing it because he wants to control her, to feel like he's powerful. And he almost does. And he pulls away at the last minute, which, good for him, but it does certainly imply a sort of dark path in him. And again, it is sort of reflected on this being rejected, the sort of memory of Paula. It's made him a worse person, and with the sort of native arrogance, self-assurance of growing up rich and sort of establishing that, he almost does something that he definitely would have regretted. And pulling back, I don't know if he's really resolved to change himself as a man. I mean, it says that he believes that God is maybe, so maybe he is. Maybe he's not. But yeah. I think you'd have to write this scene somewhat differently today. But yeah. Something to it. And yeah. Pressing on. Chapter 6. When Dolly married during the following autumn, Anson were in London on business. Like Paula's marriage, it was sudden, but it affected him in a different way. At first he felt that it was funny, and an inclination to laugh when he thought of it. Later it depressed him. It made him feel old. There was something repetitive about it. Why, Paula and Dolly had belonged to different generations. He had a foretaste of the sensation of a man of 40 who hears that the daughter of an old flame is married. He wired congratulations and, as was not the case with Paula, they were sincere. He'd never really hoped that Paula would be happy. When he returned to New York, he was made a partner in the firm, and as his responsibilities increased, he had less time on his hands. The refusal of a life insurance company to issue him a policy made such an impression on him that he stopped drinking for a year, and claimed that he felt better physically. I think he missed the convivial recountings of those Salinesque adventures which in his early 20s had played such a part in his life. No idea about that word. But he never abandoned the Yale Club. He was a figure there, a personality, and the tendency of his class, who were now 7 years out of college, to drift away to more sober odds, were checked by his presence. His day were never too full, nor his mind too weary to give any sort of aid to anyone who asked. What had been done at first through pride and superiority had become an habit and a passion. And there was always something, a younger brother in trouble at New Haven, a quarrel to be patched up between friends and his wife, or between no friend and his wife, a position to be found for this man, an investment for that. But his specialty was the solving of problems for young married people. Young married people fascinated him, and their apartments were almost sacred to him. He knew the story of their love affair, advised them where to live and how, and remembered their babies' names. Towards young wives, his attitude was circumspect. He never abused the trust which their husbands, strangely enough in view of his unconcealed irregularities, invariably reposed in him. He came to take a vicarious pleasure in happy marriages, and to be inspired to an almost equally pleasant melancholy by those that went astray. Not a season passed that he did not witness the collapse of an affair that perhaps he himself had fathered. When Paula was divorced and almost immediately remarried to another Bostonian, he talked about at a meal one afternoon. He would never love anyone as he had loved Paula, but insisted that he no longer cared. "I'll never marry," he came on to say. "I've seen too much of it, and I know a happy marriage is a very rare thing. Besides, I'm too old." But he did believe in marriage. Like all men who spring from an happy and successful marriage, he believed in it passionately. Nothing he had seen would change his belief. His cynicism dissolved upon it like air. But he did really believe he was too old. At 28, he began to accept with equanimity the prospect of marrying without romantic love. He resolutely chose a New York girl of his own class, pretty, intelligent, congenial, above reproach, and set about falling in love with her. The things he had said to Paula with sincerity, to other girls with grace, he could no longer say at all without smiling, or with the force necessary to convince. When I'm 40, I told his friends, I'll be ripe. I'll fall for some chorus girl like the rest. Nevertheless, he persisted in his attempt. His mother wanted to see him married, and he could now well afford it. He had a seat on the stock exchange, and his earned income came to $25,000 a year. The idea were agreeable when his friends spent most of his time with the set he and Dolly had evolved. Closed themselves in behind domestic doors at night, he no longer rejoiced in his freedom. He even wondered if he should have married Dolly. Not even Paula had loved him more, and he was learning the rarity in a single life of encountering true emotion. Just as this mood began to creep over him, a disquieting story reached his ear. His Aunt Edna, a woman just this side of 40, was carrying on an open intrigue with a dissolute, hard-drinking young man named Carrie Sloane. Everyone knew of it except Anson's uncle, Robert, who for 15 years had talked long in clubs and taken his wife for granted. Anson heard the story again and again with increasing annoyance. Something of his old feeling for his uncle come back to him, a feeling that was more than a personal, a reversion towards the family solidarity on which he had based his pride. His intuition singled out the essential point of the affair, which was that his uncle shouldn't be hurt. It was his first experiment in unsolicited meddling, but, with his knowledge of Edna's character, he felt that he could handle the matter better than a district judge or his uncle. His uncle were in Hot Springs. Anson traced down the sources of the scandal, so there should be no possibility of mistake, and then he called Edna and asked her to lunch with him at the plaza next day. Something in his tone must have frightened her, but she was reluctant, but he insisted, putting off the date until she had no excuse for refusing. She met him at the appointed time in the plaza lobby, a lovely, faded, grey-eyed blonde in a coat of Russian silk. 5 great rings, cold with diamonds and emeralds, sparkled on her slender hands. It occurred to Anson that it was his father's intelligence, and not his uncle's, that had earned the fur and stones, the rich brilliance that buoyed up her passing beauty. Though Edna scented his hostility, she was unprepared for the direction of his approach. "Edna, I'm astonished at the way you've been acting," he said in a strong, frank voice. "At first I couldn't believe it." "Believe what?" she demanded sharply. "You needn't pretend with me, Edna. I'm talking about Carrie Sloane. Aside from any other consideration, I didn't think you could treat Uncle Robert." "Now look here, Anson," she began angrily, but his peremptory voice broke through her. "And your children in such a way. You've been married 18 years, and you're old enough to know better. You can't talk to me like that." "Yes, I can. Uncle Robert has always been my best friend. He was tremendously moved. He felt a real distress about his uncle, about his 3 young cousins." Edna stood up, leaving her crab-flake cocktail untasted. "This is the silliest thing." "Very well, if you won't listen to me, I'll go to Uncle Robert and tell him the whole story. He's bound to hear it sooner or later. And afterwards I'll go to old Moses Sloane." Edna faltered back into her chair. "Don't talk so loud," she begged him. Her eyes blurred with tears. "You have no idea how your voice carries. You might have chosen a less public place to make all these crazy accusations." He didn't answer. "Oh, you never liked me, I know," she went on. "You're just taking advantage of some silly gossip to try and break up the only interesting friendship I've ever had. What did I ever do to make you hate me so?" Still, Anson waited. There would be the appeal to his chivalry, then to his pity, finally to his superior sophistication. When he had shouldered his way through all of these, there would be an admission, and he could come to grips with her. By being silent, by being impervious, by returning constantly to his main weapon, which was his own true emotion, he bullied her into frantic despair as the luncheon hour slipped away. At 2 o'clock, she took out a mirror and handkerchief, shined away the marks of her tears, and powdered the slight hollow where they had lain. She had agreed to meet him at her own house at 5. When he arrived, she was stretched on a chaise lounge, which was covered with creatine for the summer. Recovered with cretonne for the summer. And the tears had caught up at luncheon seemed to still be standing in her eyes. Then he was aware of Carrie Sloane's dark, anxious presence upon the cold hearth. What's this idea of yours? Broke out Sloane immediately. I understand you invited Edna to lunch and then threatened her on the basis of some cheap scandal. Anson sat down. I have no reason to think it's only scandal. I hear you're going to take her to Robert Hunter and to my father. Anson nodded. Either you break it off or I will, he said. What goddamn business is it of yours, Hunter? Don't lose your temper, Carrie, said Edna nervously. It's only a question of showing him how absurd. For the one thing, it's my name that's being handed round, interrupted Anson. That's all that concerns you, Carrie? Edna isn't a member of your family. She most certainly is. His anger mounted. Why, she owns this house and the rings on her fingers to my father's brains. When Uncle Muppet married her, she didn't have a penny. They all looked at the rings as if they had a significant bearing on the situation. Anna made a gesture to take them from her hands. I guess they're not the only rings in the world, said Sloane. Oh, this is absurd, cried Edna. Anson, will you listen to me? I found out how the silly story started. It was a maid I discharged who went right to the chill chiefs. All these Russians pump things out of their servants and then put a false meaning on them. She brought down her fist angrily on the table. And after Robert lent them their limousine for a whole month when we went south last winter. Don't you see? Demanded Sloane eagerly. The maid got hold of the wrong end of the thing. She knew that Edna and I was friends, and she carried it to the chill chiefs. In Russia, they assume that a man and a woman enlarge the thing with disquisition upon social relations in the Caucasus. If that's the case, it better be explained to Uncle Robert, said Anson dryly, so that when the rumours do reach him, he'll know they're not true. Adopting the method he had followed with Edna at luncheon, he let them explain it all away. He knew that they was guilty, and that presently they would cross the line from explanation into justification, and convict themselves more definitely than he could ever do. By 7 they had taken the desperate step of telling him the truth. Robert Hunter's neglect, Edna's every empty laugh, the casual dalliance that had flamed up into passion. But like so many true stories, it had the misfortune of being old. Its enfeebled body had beat helplessly against the armour of Anson's will. The threat to go to Sloane's father sealed their helplessness, for the latter, a retired cotton broker out of Alabama, were a notorious fundamentalist, who controlled his son by rigid allowance, and a promise that at his next vagary the allowance would stop forever. They dined at a small French restaurant, and the discussion continued. At one time Sloane resorted to physical threats. A little later they were both imploring him to give them time. But Anson were obdurate. He saw that Edna were breaking up, and their spirit must not be refreshed by any renewal of their passion. At 2 o'clock, in a small nightclub on 53rd Street, Edna's nerves suddenly collapsed, and she cried to go home. Sloane had been drinking heavily all evening, and he was faintly maudlin, leaning on the table and weeping a little with his face in his hands. Quickly Anson gave him his terms. Sloane would leave town for 6 months, and he must be gone within 48 hours. When he returned, there would be no resumption of the affair. At the end of a year, Edna might, if she wished, tell Robert Hunter that she wanted a divorce, go about it the usual way. He paused, gaining confidence from their faces for his final words. Well, there's another thing you can do, he said slowly. If Edna wants to leave her children, there's nothing I can do to prevent you running off together. I want to go home, cried Edna again. Oh, haven't you done enough to us for one day? Outside it was dark, save for a blurred glow from 6th Avenue. Down the street. In that light, those two who had been lovers looked for the last time into each other's tragic faces, realising that between them there were not enough youth and strength to avert the eternal parting. Sloane walked suddenly off down the street, and Anson tapped the dozing taxi driver on the arm. They were almost 4. There were a patient flow of clean water along the ghostly pavement of 5th Avenue, and the shadow of 2 night women flitted over the dark facade at St. Thomas's Church. Then the desolate shrubbery at Central Park, where Anson had often played as a child, the mountain numbers significant as names of the marching streets. This was his city, he thought, where his name had flourished through 5 generations. No change could alter the permanence of his place here. The change itself was the essential substratum by which he and those of his name identified themselves with the spirit of New York. Resourcefulness and a powerful will, for his threats and weaker hands would have been less than nothing, but beating the gathering dust from his uncle's name, from his name, the name of his family, and even the shivering figure that sat beside him in the car. Carrie Sloane's body were found next morning on the lower shelf of a pillar of Queensborough Bridge. In the darkness and his excitement, he had thought that it were the water flowing back beneath him. But in less than a second it made no possible difference, unless he had planned to think one last thought of Edna, and call out her name as he struggled feebly in the water. Well then, that's the end of chapter 6. I was going to say I wasn't sure whether that was meant to be a positive thing or a negative thing that Anson were doing that. Obviously, cheating on a partner is, pretty markedly scummy. But at the same time, marriages in the 1920s are significantly harder to get out of, despite the mention of a divorce by the usual way. Especially if you come from nothing. No doubt the children would have stayed with the husband. The only option he really gives her is to run off without them, abandon her family and lose everything. It's a little bit mixed, but I think that last passage there sort of cements it. When you drive a man to suicide because he is so genuinely in love with a woman, even if their relationship is born on an affair, it does generally imply that probably you've done something a bit of the wrong. So I'm going to take it that this is a dark moment for Anson. I should have my drink of water. But yeah. What I do want to take a moment to mention though is what Fitzgerald does here really effectively is the way in which he structures the conversation, in which Anson's strategy of, basically letting the other person break themselves upon his unmoving facade is a really effective little bit of social strategy. It's a really well, how do you say, not realised, but described and designed manner of conversation. A lot of the time in stories, dialogue is sort of written to be good dialogue, but this is actually an effective sort of communication strategy that I respect being employed here. It's well done, and I'm interested to see it for a change. The music has died. Why has the music died? Oh, there it goes again. Not sure what's going on there, but yeah, anyway. That being the case, yeah. Anson moving down a darker path, though showing his powers of persuasion. Let's press on. Chapter 7. Anson never blamed himself for his part in the affair. The situation which brought it about had not been of his making, but the just suffer with the unjust. He found that his oldest and somehow his most precious friendship were over. He never knew what distorted story Edna told, but he was welcome in his uncle's house no longer. Just before Christmas, Mrs. Hunter retired as a select Episcopal Evan, and Anson became the responsible head of the family. An unmarried aunt who had lived with them for years ran the house, and attempted with outless inefficiency to chaperone the younger girls. All the children was less self-reliant than Anson, more conventional both in their virtues and in their shortcomings. Mrs. Hunter's death had postponed the debut of one daughter and the wedding of another. Also, it had taken something deeply material from all of them, with a passing the quiet, expensive superiority of the Hunters come to an end. For one thing, the estate, considerably diminished by 2 inheritance taxes, and soon to be divided among 6 children, were not a notable fortune anymore. Anson saw a tendency in his younger sisters to speak rather respectfully of families that hadn't existed 20 years ago. His own feeling of precedence were not echoed in them. Sometimes they was conventionally snobbish, that was all. For another thing, this was the last summer they would spend on the Connecticut estate. The clamour against it were too loud. Who wants to waste away the best months of the year shut up in that dead old town? Reluctantly he yielded. The house would go into the market in the fall. The next summer they would rent a smaller place in Westchester county. Sorry. They were a step down from the expensive simplicity of his father's idea, and, while he sympathised with the revolt, it also annoyed him. During his mother's lifetime he had gone up there at least every other weekend, even in the gayest summers. Yet he himself were part of this change, and his strong instinct for life had turned him in his 20s from the hollow obsequies of that abortive leisure class. He did not see this clearly. He still felt that there were a norm, a standard of society, but there were no norm. It would doubtful if there ever had been the true norm in New York. The few he still paid and thought to enter a particular set succeeded only to find that as a society it scarcely functioned, or what was more alarming, that the bohemia from which they had fled sat above them at the table. At 29, Anson's chief concern were his own growing loneliness. He was sure now that he would never marry. The number of weddings at which he had officiated as best man or usher were past all counting. There was a drawer at home that bulged with the official neckties of this or that wedding party. Neckties standing for romances that had not endured a year, for couples who had passed completely from his life. Scarf pins, gold pencils, cuff buttons, presents from a generation of grooms had passed through his jewel box and been lost. And with every ceremony you were less and less able to imagine yourself in the groom's place. Under his hearty goodwill towards all those marriages, there was despair about his own. And as he neared 30, he became not a little depressed at the inroads that marriage, especially lately, had made upon his friendships. Groups of people had a disconcerting tendency to dissolve and disappear. The men from his own college, and it were upon them he had expended the most time and affection, was the most elusive of all. Most of them were drawn deep in their domesticity. 2 was dead, 1 lived abroad, 1 was in Hollywood writing continuities for pictures that Anson went faithfully to see. Most of them, however, were permanent commuters with an intricate family life centred around some suburban country club. It was from these that he felt his estrangement most keenly. In the early days of their married life, they had all needed him. He gave them advice about their slim finances. He exorcised their doubts about the advisability of bringing a baby into 2 rooms and a bath. Especially he stood for the great world outside. But now their financial troubles was in the past, and the fearfully expected child had evolved into an absorbing family. They was always glad to see old Anson, but they dressed up for him and tried to impress him with their present importance, and kept their troubles to themselves. They needed him no longer. A few weeks before his 30th birthday, the last of his earthly and intimate friends was married. Anson acted in his usual role of best man, gave his usual silver tea service, and went down to the usual Homeric to say goodbye. It were not Friday afternoon in May. He walked from the pier. He realised that Saturday closing had begun, and he was free until Monday morning. Go where? He asked himself. The Yale Club, of course. Bridge until dinner, then 4 or 5 raw cocktails in somebody's room, and a pleasant, confused evening. He regretted that this afternoon's groom wouldn't be along. They had always been able to cram so much into such nights. They knew how to attach women and how to get rid of them, how much consideration any girl deserved from their intelligent hedonism. A party were an adjusted thing. You took certain girls to certain places and spent just so much on their amusement. You drank a little, not much, more than you ought to drink. And at a certain time in the morning you stood up and said you were going home. You avoided college boys, sponges, future engagements, fights, sentiments and indiscretions. That was the way it was done. All the rest were dissipation. In the morning you were never violently sorry. You made no resolutions, but if you had overdone it, and your heart was slightly out of order, you went up on the wagon for a few days without saying anything about it, and waited until an accumulation of nervous boredom projected you into another party. The lobby of the Yale Club were unpopulated. In the bar, 3 very young alumni looked up at him, momentarily and without curiosity. "Hello there, Oscar," he said to the bartender. "Mr. Cahill been around this afternoon?" "Mr. Cahill's gone to New Haven." "Ah, that's so. Gone to the ball game. Lots of men gone up." Anson looked once again around into the lobby, considered for a moment, and then walked out and over to 5th Avenue. From the broad window of one of his clubs, one that he had scarcely visited in 5 years, a grey man with watery eyes stared down at him. Anson looked quickly away. That figure, sitting in vacant resignation and supercilious solitude, depressed him. He stopped and, retracing his steps, started over 47th Street towards Teak Warden's apartment. Teak and his wife had once been his most familiar friends. They were an household where he and Dolly Carter had been used to go in on the days of their affair. But Teak had taken a drink, and his wife had remarked publicly that Anson were a bad influence on him. The remark reached Anson in an exaggerated form. When we were finally cleared up, the delicate spell of intimacy was broken, now to be renewed. "Is Mr. Warden at home?" he inquired. "They've gone to the country." The fact unexpectedly cut him. They was gone to the country and he hadn't known. 2 years before he would have known the date, the hour, come up at the last moment for a final drink, and planned his first visit to them. Now they'd gone without a word. Anson looked at his watch and considered a weekend with his family. But the only train were a local that would jolt through the aggressive heat for 3 hours. And tomorrow in the country and Sunday. He were in no mood for Porch Bridge with polite undergraduates, and dancing after dinner in a roadhouse, a diminutive of gaiety which his father had estimated too well. "Oh no," he said to himself. "No." He were a dignified, impressive young man, rather stout now, but otherwise unmarked by dissipation. He could have been cast for a pillar or something. At times you were sure it were not society, at others nothing else. For the law, for the church. He stood for a few minutes motionless on the sidewalk in front of a 47th Street apartment house. For almost the first time in his life, he had nothing whatever to do. Then he began to walk briskly up Fifth Avenue, as if he had just been reminded of an important engagement there. The necessity of dissimulation is one of the few characteristics that we share with dogs. When I think of Anson on that day as some well-bred specimen who had been disappointed at a familiar back door. We were going to see Nick, once a fashionable bartender in demandable private dances, now employed in cooling non-alcoholic champagne among the labyrinthine cellars of the Plaza Hotel. "Nick," he said, "what's happened to everything?" "Dead," Nick said. "Make me a whiskey sour." Anson handed him a pint bottle over the counter. "Nick, the girls are different. I had a little girl in Brooklyn and she got married last week without letting me know." "That a fact," responded Nick diplomatically. "Slipped it over on you." "Absolutely," said Anson. "And I was out with her the night before." said Nick. "You remember the wedding, Nick, in Hot Springs, where I had the waiters and the musicians singing God Save the King?" "Now where was that, Mr. Hunter?" Nick concentrated doubtfully. "Seems to me that was the next time they were back for more, and I began to wonder how much I'd paid them," continued Anson. "Seems to me that was at Mr. Trenholm's wedding." "Don't know," said Anson decisively. He was offended that a strange name should intrude upon his reminiscence, and Nick perceived this. "No, he admitted. "I ought to know that. It was one of your crowd. Baker, said Anson responsively. "They put me in a hearse afterwards. It was over and covered me up with flowers and drove me away." Said Nick. Nick's simulation of the old family servant paled presently, and Anson went upstairs to the lobby. He looked around. His eyes met the glance of an unfamiliar clerk at the desk, and fell upon a flower from the morning's marriage, hesitating in the mouth of a brass cuspidor. He went out and walked slowly towards the blood-red sun over Columbus Circle. Suddenly he turned round and, retracing his steps to the plaza, immured himself in a telephone book. Later he said that he tried to get me 3 times that afternoon. He tried everyone who might be in New York, men and girls he had not seen for years. An artist model of his college days, whose faded number was still in his address book. Central told him that even the exchange existed no longer. At length his quest roved into the country, and he held brief, disappointing conversations with emphatic butlers and maids. So-and-so was out, riding, swimming, playing golf, sailed to Europe last week. Who shall I say find? It were intolerable that he should pass the evening alone. The private reckoning which one plans for a moment of leisure lose every charm when the solicitude is enforced. There was always women of a sort, but the ones he knew had temporarily vanished, and to pass a New York evening in the hired company of a stranger never occurred to him. He would have considered that was something shameful and secret, the diversion of a travelling salesman in a strange town. Anson paid the telephone bill. The girl tried unsuccessfully to joke with him about his size. For the second time in the afternoon, started to leave the plaza, and go he knew not where. Near the revolving door, the figure of a woman, obviously with child, stood sideways to the light. The sheer beige cape fluttered at her shoulders when the door turned, and each time she looked impatiently towards it as if she were weary of waiting. At the first sight of her, a strange, nervous thrill of familiarity went over him, but not until he were within 5 feet of her did he realise it was Paula. Why, Anson Hunter? His heart turned over. Why, Paula! Why, this is wonderful! I can't believe it! Anson! She took both his hands, and he saw in the freedom of the gesture that the memory of him had lost poignancy to her, but not to him. He felt that old mood she evoked in him stealing over his brain, that gentleness with which he had always met her optimism, as if arrayed the morris surface. But we had arrived for the summer. Pete had to come east on business, you know, of course. I'm Mrs. Peter Haggerty now, so he brought the children and took a house. You've got to come and see us. Can I? He asked directly. When? When you like. Here's Pete. The revolving door functioned, giving up a fine, tall man of 30, with a tan face and trim moustache. His immaculate fitness made a sharp contrast with Anson's increasing bulk, which were obvious under the faintly tight cutaway coat. You wouldn't be standing, said Haggerty to his wife. Let's sit down here. He indicated lobby chairs, but Paula hesitated. I've got to go right home, she said. Anson, why don't you just come out and have dinner with us tonight? We're getting settled. You can just stand that. You can stand that. Haggerty confirmed the invitation cordially. Come out for the night. Their car waited in front of the hotel, and Paula, with a tired gesture, sank back against silk cushions at the corner. There's so much I want to talk to you about, she said. It seems hopeless. I want to hear about you. Well, she smiled at Haggerty. That would take a long time too. I have 3 children, by my first marriage. The oldest is 5, then 4, then 3. She smiled again. I didn't waste much time having them, did I? Boys? A boy and 2 girls. Then, a lot of things happened. I got a divorce in Paris a year ago, and married Pete. That's all, except that I'm awfully happy. In Rye, they drove up to a large house near the beach club, from which there issued presently 3 dark, slim children who broke from an English governess and approached them with an esoteric cry. Abstractedly and with difficulty, Paula took each one into her arms, a caress which they accepted stiffly, as they had evidently been told not to bump in the mummy. Even against their fresh faces, Paula's old skin showed scarcely any weariness. For all her physical languor, she seemed younger than when he had last seen her at Palm Beach 7 years ago. At dinner she was preoccupied, and afterwards, during the homage to the radio, she lay with closed eyes on the sofa, till Anson wondered if his presence at this time were not an intrusion. At 9 o'clock, when Haggerty rose and said pleasantly that he was going to leave them by themselves for a while, she began to talk slowly about herself and the past. My first baby, she said, the one we called Darling, the biggest little girl. I wanted to die when I knew I was going to have her, because Loelle was like a stranger to me. It didn't seem as though she could be my own. I read you a letter and tore it up. Oh, you were so bad to me, Anson. With the dialogue again, rising and falling, Anson felt suddenly a sudden quickening of memory. When you engaged once? She asked. A girl named Dolly something. I wasn't never engaged. I tried to be engaged, but I never loved anybody but you, Paula. Oh, she said, and after a moment, this baby's the first one I ever really wanted. You see, I'm in love now, at last. He didn't answer, shocked at the treachery of her remembrance. She must have seen that the at last bruised him. She continued, I was infatuated with you, Anson. You could make me do anything you liked, but we wouldn't have been happy. I'm not smart enough for you. I don't like things to be complicated like you do. She paused. You'll never settle down, she said. The phrase struck him from beyond. It was an accusation that of all accusations he had never married. I could settle down if women were different, he said. If I didn't understand so much about them. If women didn't spoil you for other women, if they had only a little pride. If I could go to sleep for a while and wake up into a home that was really mine. That's what I'm made for, Paula. That's what women have seen in me and liked in me. It's only that I can't get through the preliminaries anymore. Haggerty come in a little before 11. After a whiskey, Paula stood up and announced that she was going to bed. She went over and stood by her husband. Where did you go, dearest? She demanded. I had a drink with Ed Saunders. I was worried. I thought maybe you'd run away. She rested her head against his coat. He's sweet, isn't he, Anson? She demanded. Absolutely, said Anson, laughing. She raised her face to her husband. Well, I'm ready, she said. She turned to Anson. Do you want to see our family gymnastics stunt? Yes, he said in an interested voice. All right, here we go. Haggerty picked her up easily in his arms. This is called the family acrobatics stunt, said Paula. He carries me upstairs. Isn't it sweet of him? Yes, said Anson. Haggerty bent his head slightly until his face touched Paula's. And I love him, she said. I've just been telling you, haven't I, Anson? Yes, he said. He's the dearest thing that ever lived in this world, aren't you, darling? Now, good night. Here we go. Isn't he strong? Yes, said Anson. We'll find a pair of Pete's pajamas laid out for you. Sweet dreams. See you at breakfast. Yes, said Anson. That's the end of chapter 7. Now look at the life that could have been and was not. I have my little drink now. Almost to the end now, only 2 more pages. But what can we say about that one, eh? A devastating thing to find yourself 30 and alone. Nothing to do in the world for the first time. And then to find something and find it almost worse than being alone, eh? 2 devastations inside of a night. Almost enough to break a man like that. But will it? Well, let's find out, shall we? Chapter 8. The older members of the firm insisted that Anson should go abroad for the summer. He'd scarcely had a vacation in 7 years, they said. He was stale and needed a change. Anson resisted. If I go, he declared, I won't come back anymore. That's absurd, old man. You'll be back in 3 months with all the depression gone, fit as ever. No, he shook his head stubbornly. If I stop, I won't go back to work. If I stop, that means I've given up. I'm through. We'll take a chance on that. Stay 6 months if you like. We're not afraid you'll leave us. I'd be miserable if you didn't work. They arranged his passage for him. They liked Anson. Everyone liked Anson. And the change that had been coming over him cast a sort of pall on the office. The enthusiasm that invariably signalled up business. The consideration towards his equals and his inferiors. The lift of his vital presence, where in the past 4 months his intense nervousness had melted down these qualities into the fussy pessimism of a man of 40. On every transaction in which he were involved, he acted like a drag and a strain. If I go, I'll never come back, he said. 3 days before he sailed, Paula Legendre Haggerty died in childbirth. It will with him a great deal then, I will with him a great deal then. We were crossing together, but for the first time in our friendship he told me not a word of how he felt, nor did I see the slightest sign of emotion. His chief preoccupation was with the fact that he was 30 years old. We turned the conversation to the point where he could remind you of it, and then fall silent, as if he assumed that the statement would start a chain of thought sufficient to itself. Like his partners, I was amazed at the change in him, and I was glad when the Parry moved off into the wet space between worlds, leaving his principality behind. How about a drink? He suggested. We walked into the bar with that defiant feeling that characterises the day of departure, and ordered 4 martinis. After 1 cocktail, a change came over him. He suddenly reached across and slapped my knee with the first joviality I'd seen him exhibit for months. Did you see that girl in the red turn? He demanded. The one with the high colour, who had 2 police dogs down to bid her goodbye. She's pretty, I agreed. I looked her up in the purser's office and found out that she's alone. I'm going down to see the steward in a few minutes. We'll have dinner with her tonight. After a while he left me. Within an hour he was walking up and down the deck with her, talking to her in his strong, clear voice. Her red tam and a bright spot colour against the steel grey sea, and from time to time she looked up with flashing bob of her head, and smiled with amusement and interest and anticipation. At dinner we had champagne and was very joyous. Afterwards, Anson ran the pool with an infectious gusto, and several people who had seen me with him asked me his name. He and the girl was talking and laughing together on a lounge in the bar when I went to bed. I saw less of him on the trip than I'd hoped. He went to arrange a foursome, but there was no one available, so I saw him only at meals. Sometimes, though, he would have a cocktail in the bar. He told me about the girl in the red tam and his adventures with her, making them all bizarre and amusing, as he had a way of doing. And I was glad that he were himself again, at least the self that I knew, with which I felt at home. I don't think he were ever happy unless someone were in love with him, responding to him like violins to a magnet, helping him to explain himself, promising him something. When it was I do not know. Perhaps they promised that there would always be women in the world who would spend their brightest, freshest, rarest hours to nurse and protect the superiority he cherished in his art. And that's the end of The Rich Boy. Well. That was close. He almost become a person there for a moment. Right, let's head back over to my rest strange. So, almost become a person, but he just managed to avoid it. Was a pity, yeah? So what can we say about that, eh? Well, first things first, perhaps most obvious. Whoop. At your Blake, I'm glad you enjoyed it. First things first, the most obvious. Rich people is all awful and do not deserve our sympathy. I still think that it's remarkably well titled, The Rich Boy, because he does not ever seem to grow up. It's strange, really. He has so many qualities that almost seem admirable in him. A willingness to help other people, his fundamental belief in love, the way he goes out of his way to help people and to be kind, and yet, you know, he never does anything too explicitly wrong, nothing crazy, but at the last, he's a shallow, conceited little man with nothing to him. Thank you as well. I'm glad you enjoyed it. The Rich Boy indeed. He really does live up to the title. I like how Fitzgerald writes about rich people. You're very welcome, man. The way he writes about rich people does, I don't know, it sticks with me somehow. He manages to make them real, while at the same time making them larger in life, you know? He makes them interesting in a way that, you know, big parties and loud things are interesting. But he never makes them more than people. He never makes them special. I think the first chapter, the little sort of one-page spiel at the beginning where he talks about them, really does do a good job of summing up his views of them. I normally hate to read about rich people and about nobility, if I'm honest. I find them very dull and boring. But Fitzgerald does a very good job with them. And even here, this one man, not like any other man, and yet so terribly predictable in his flaws. A sad little thing. Interesting, though. That's strange. I don't know why I like that story. Thinking about it, like going over it, I'm like in my head, yeah, it was a good story, but I didn't like it. But I did like it. I enjoyed that one. And I don't really know why. It might just be spite. I don't like rich people and seeing one here portrayed as something of a prat, you know? But I did enjoy it. Yeah. And I'm trying to think what there is to say about it. I think he's just an interesting character, is Anson Hunter. He's a prick, and he's an awful prick, but he's an interesting prick, you know what I mean? Anyhow. Yeah, I will say, I mentioned it before during the chapter, but again I will say, really appreciate the sort of dialogue that he manages to. The fact that he, like, in his one major confrontation, well actually, even in the way he handles Dolly, he's very good at controlling people through conversation. Like, he does talk like a person who's good at controlling people. Like, it's one of those, you get that a lot in books, right, where someone is like described as being charismatic or being a genius or whatever, and you can't really see it because it's hard to display. Fitzgerald does a good job here of making him charismatic, of making him good and controlling. It's a really well written story. I think there's probably more to it that I'm missing here. I'll have to go over it again sometime. Yeah. But other than that, I don't think I've got a lot else to say. And we are getting pretty close to another round of ads. I don't want to subject you to that if we don't have to. So, that being the case, let's see. I'll read that real quick. Oh well, I know you can't be part. I know you'd be heartbroken to be parted from Skitter, so we'll read out the Skitters tomorrow, so we can maintain the Skitter hierarchy. But yeah. Reading that down. Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. I hope you've enjoyed your time, which, as always, I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. Until, of course, the next time, when, as always, you need to be back here. Otherwise, you won't have no lesson. But I hope you've enjoyed your evening. Lovely emotes played. And you all have a lovely day. Oh, and the ads is right about to come on. So, before they can do that, I shall bid you all, as always, ta-ra.